It's been 3 decades since Peggy McIntosh, a women's studies scholar at Wellesley College, published her landmark essay, White Privilege and Male Privilege. In it, she observed that even her most well-meaning male colleagues, those aware of the discrimination female scholars faced, were nevertheless blind to the ways that they, as male academics, benefited from that discriminatory system, from easier career advancement to the power to decide curriculum. She then posited a corollary, that whites like her were similarly unaware of the advantages they enjoyed from a system of policies and social norms that disadvantaged minorities. I think whites are carefully taught not to recognize white privilege, as males are taught not to recognize male privilege, she wrote. As illustration, she offered a list of some of those privileges, such as the freedom to go shopping, fairly well assured that I will not be followed or harassed by store detectives, or the ability to criticize our government and talk about how much I fear its policies and behavior without being seen as a cultural outsider. McIntosh's essay is the text of what has become a core principle among academics, diversity trainers, social justice activists, and liberal society at large. The concept has been applied to other dominant groups, cisgender privilege, age privilege, and led to the catchphrase, check your privilege, which roughly means, be aware of and admit to your own favored personal situation when talking about problems in society. Like a lot of people in my generation, I have issues with the use of the word privilege in some of these contexts. Among other things, it implies that a freedom as basic as not getting harassed by police is a kind of special perk rather than a fundamental right. But the basic point is correct, and essential. Many of us, especially we white men, go about our daily lives blissfully unaware of the benefits we enjoy. McIntosh calls them unearned advantages, from not being the victims of oppression. In fact, I'd like to extend McIntosh's concept to another form of unearned advantage, the economic opportunities enjoyed by residents of a handful of the nation's largest and wealthiest coastal metropolitan areas. Cities like San Francisco, New York, and Washington, D.C., and their suburbs, have raced ahead of most of the rest of the country in recent decades. But the well-educated liberals who most benefit from all this economic growth, the same people who are most likely to be woke to privilege in other contexts, don't seem to recognize that a substantial portion of the gains are unearned, ill-gotten, and coming at someone else's expense. Put simply, these big liberal metro areas aren't thriving simply because they're liberal, or educated, or innovative. They're doing so in large part thanks to federal policies that allow them to suck up more than their fair share of the nation's wealth. Since 1980, the gap between the per capita income in the wealthiest 10% of metro areas and the poorest 10% has grown by 21%. The contrast with rural America is even starker. As recently as 20 years ago, sparsely populated counties were doing fine. In fact, during the first 4 years of the 1990s boom, their rates of business startups and employment growth exceeded those of the big cities. But their economies collapsed during the 2008 recession and have not recovered, even as the largest metro areas have flourished. These growing geographic disparities ought to alarm everyone, especially those who claim to care about inequality. But instead of concern, what you too often hear from coastal liberals is smug satisfaction that they're the forward-thinking economic drivers of the national economy and that they disproportionately pay the nation's taxes. Writing in the New Republic in 2017, contributing editor Kevin Baker took this triumphalism a step further by proposing, tongue only partially in cheek, that wealthy blue states, or, as he dubbed them, the United States of we pay our own damn way, should virtually secede from the Union. This lack of empathy is partly understandable. Red state voters elected and continue to support a corrupt, racist, misogynist, dissembling authoritarian whose agenda and impulses threaten the whole world. But is also a stark example of privilege as McIntosh defined it. These blue megacities are getting ahead in part because of a system of unearned advantages that directly contributes to the heartland's economic distress. This magazine has long made the argument, advanced in this issue in twin cover stories by Daniel Block and Claire Kellaway, that the migration of wealth and opportunity to a handful of coastal metro areas is not primarily the consequence of inevitable market forces, but of policy choices made in Washington. Beginning in the 1970s, and with accelerating force in the 1980s, elected officials dismantled a set of rules that for decades had allowed all parts of the country to compete on a level playing field. These included safeguards for local banks and retailers, regulations that kept the costs of air travel relatively uniform throughout the country, and strict enforcement of federal antitrust laws. The results of this dismantling have been devastating. Chain stores headquartered in distant cities bought out local retailers and are themselves now threatened by a single fast-growing Seattle-based monopoly, Amazon. Megabanks in New York and San Francisco acquired local lenders, depriving regional economies of access to capital. 4 airlines now control 80% of the domestic market, and the New York-based hedge funds that own them have cut service and raised prices for flights to and from small and mid-sized cities, rendering them less competitive places to do business. The same thing has happened across industries. As cities in the interior lost companies headquartered there through corporate mergers, they lost their economic engines, while the already wealthy coastal megalopolises gained horsepower. And as those interior cities try to reinvent themselves by nurturing entrepreneurs, their local startups are being acquired by tech monopolies located, where else, on the coasts. Rural America has been even harder hit by this orgy of industry consolidation. As Claire Kellaway documents, big ag monopolies in recent years have relentlessly raised prices on what farmers buy, seed, fertilizer, and pushed down the prices of what farmers sell, grain, livestock, to the point where we are on the verge of a farm crisis more sweeping than the one that ripped rural America apart in the 1980s.